Welcome to episode 159 of the Bandhive Podcast. It is time for another episode of the Bandhive Podcast. My name is James Cross, and I help independent artists tour smart. This week, I'm very happy to have back Mr. Matt Hose of Alive in Barcelona, who just finished taking a sip of coffee. How are you doing today, Matt?
I'm doing fantastic. Coffee makes everything wonderful, so I have a nice, huge cup of it, so that makes the day great.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that, and you know what? On my end, I think having you back on the show makes everything fantastic. So it's great to have you here, and I'm looking forward to many hundreds of episodes to come.
Oh, James, you're going to make me red.
You're already red. You're ginger. And I'm already red because I have rosacea. We're all red. Anyway, man, it's a pleasure to have you back here. And this episode, it was going to be one episode, but we're splitting it up into two. The original topic was going to be health for musicians, and we were going to cover both the mental and the physical side. And then as we were going through the outline, we kind of realized, hey, this is getting really long. So this is going to be part one. Maybe it's going to be a two-part episode, or maybe it's just going to be two related episodes. But this week on the show, we're going to talk about mental health for musicians. And Matt, I think we've told on the story before how we really connected back on Warped Tour. But I think that the day we really became friends more than acquaintances, we were in Holmdel, New Jersey, and you had like a family emergency. You were heading home, and you were just not having a good day because you were stressed. You were worried about your family. And I went over and sat down, and we just chatted. And I can't remember if it was on the back of your trailer or just a curb or something, whatever it was. We were just chatting, and that's when we really connected, and we're like, okay, from that point on, we were friends, not just acquaintances. And this ties in because we were supporting each other. Mental health is so important for musicians, and there are a lot of musicians who tend to have mental health problems or are neurodivergent. Being a creative kind of comes with the territory for many people. So I think this is going to tie in for a lot of people just because when I look at my friends in the music world, almost all of them are neurodivergent or have mental health struggles in some way. So the first thing I want to say is that if this describes you in any way, we're not doing this episode to shame you or call you out or anything like that. We're just saying, hey, people have stuff going on in their lives, and we want to talk about that to help others and put some resources out there. So the first thing I want to say after that whole rant is that we're not experts. This is just what we've seen that works for us and the people around us. But if you need professional help, there are organizations out there who will help musicians. MusiCares and Backline are two really good organizations that you can reach out to. MusiCares is national. As far as I know, Backline is as well. But there are probably also regional resources available to you in your area if MusiCares and Backline don't offer help in your area or you don't qualify for the resources they provide. Now, that all said, that disclaimer aside, like I said, it's great to have you back, Matt, and I'm excited to cover this topic with you because I think it's really important for artists.
Absolutely, man. It's honestly great to be back, and it's also great to be talking about something like this because, you know, like you said, creatives in general, I think we find a home inside of the sludge, and sometimes, you know, it's hard to wash that sludge off. The very nature of being a musician in general is one where you kind of have to face your problems head on, and that's very, very difficult. Like you're saying, like some people are neurodivergent, some people, you might have clinical depression, some people just might have an overbearing amount of stress in their life for a particular instance or whatever. It might not be this consistent thing. Maybe it is a consistent thing. Maybe you consistently have this large weight to bear. The big thing is, like, this is a very common thing. Being musicians, we tend to use those items as our fodder for our songs. Ironically, I've always said that lead singers are a very emotional group. Being a singer and a songwriter, I have to kind of find those less savory stories, and I have to kind of try and face them, you know, head on. And when you kind of start dwelling on these things, you have two choices. I am crippled by this, I am crushed by this, and there's no way out. Or it's like, this is the thing I have to face, and I have to take the time to understand it, to think about how it applies to my life, to think about how it applies to this song. For me, I actually use music to work a lot of my mental health issues because there might be something that I'm feeling, or maybe I just don't understand exactly how to say it in words. Maybe there are pieces that involve other people, you know, where it's like, I'm feeling stressed out towards my bandmates right now. There's too many obligations. I've got 3 kids at home. I've got a wife. I've got to make sure I'm doing all these things. And sometimes that can cause me to shut off in my personal world, the emotional sifting through your own emotions and your own thoughts, to me, it's integral to music as a whole. I've always thought that mental health and music in general, they walk down the street hand in hand. Because I think we've all had a moment where we've said, oh, music saved my life. It's always with a different band or with a different song or with a different memory or in a different clique of friends or whatever piece of nostalgia that draws us back to that. But it kind of all starts with a socioeconomic reach and a drive for solving a problem. And most of the time, that problem is mental. So we want to dive in. We want to talk about how mental health can really affect your music career and really what it means to live a healthy mental life for musicians.
Absolutely, because there's just so many ways that low mental health can harm your music career, whether it's something like you don't have the motivation to work on your band, either the music side or the business side, because they're both important. Maybe your band splits up different people into different roles, and that's fine and great, but you still need people to be at a functional capacity, and ideally a capacity where they're happy with what they're doing. You don't want people to be in the band and miserable about what they're doing. Or maybe you have some anxiety when it comes to releasing your music or performing in front of people. I get it. I'm not a musician myself, but putting yourself out there can be scary. And for some people, that really gets to the amount of anxiety or fear. It can be really difficult. For other people, it's just a minor thing like, hey, what if people don't like this? Whether it's just a little tinkle in your gut or it's like crippling anxiety, it's not fun. And there are ways to try and mitigate that. But if what you love most is releasing music, but the actual process of releasing it is so gut-wrenching for you, that's not good. Because then you're not going to enjoy the actual process of doing what you love most. Or maybe it's something like fear of failure. That can be a really difficult one to deal with as well. These are just examples. There are so many other ways that low mental health can affect you as an artist and as a human being. For years, I didn't realize how many people in the music industry have mental health issues. We all see the headlines. So-and-so has breakdown, meltdown, whatever. And it's like, oh, that sucks. They went crazy. That's the response a lot of people have. But it's not that. They didn't have the resources they needed to properly maintain their mental health. That's really what it comes down to. And by saying that kind of stuff like, oh, they went crazy, that just perpetuates the stigma that mental health is a taboo to talk about or anything like that. And I've been very, very blessed to have, in my opinion, great mental health for most of my life, with a blip or two here and there with things stressing me out and that kind of stuff. But what really got me is a few months ago, I did a bunch of research on ADHD and various mental health issues, just because I met some people that have those things. And it all started to click. I'm like, oh my God, like probably 50% of the musicians I know have ADHD. It makes so much sense to me now.
Guilty.
Yeah, there you go. I didn't even see that in you, but it makes sense.
That's funny that you say that because, ADHD, I've always said, I've had undiagnosed ADHD ever since I was little. Even now I'm sitting here, my knees are bouncing. And that's just kind of like my prone state. My mom always called me a fidget. And one of my sons is also a fidget as well. It definitely plays a major role. And, like when crunch time comes and you can't focus or the thoughts are flying so fast and you're trying anything that you can to latch onto one of them, it can be very, very daunting and difficult, crippling. It feels like trying to grab a rock while you're rushing down a river. You're moving too fast to even be able to function. And all you want is to cling on to like one thing to give you a little bit of stability. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Maybe you have to wait until the water's a little bit more calm, assuming you don't drown.
That sounds so difficult. I can't even fathom what that would feel like because, I haven't experienced that. But I can empathize because that just sounds like a nightmare. You're chasing a goal and you can't get there and it's just slipping through your fingers over and over again. It sounds kind of like that's what you're describing.
And to a degree, I've had it my whole life, so I don't know what it's like without it. It's like the old adage that you can't fear what you don't know. And so it's like, I don't really know the difference. I don't know how my brain would work if I didn't have it. But in the end, it doesn't matter because I've had it for so long and I've had to develop systems or good habits in my life that compensate for, like I know this about me. I know that it's going to take me longer to write a song in some conditions than it would in other conditions. There are some days when it just flies freely. There are some days when I have to write for hours and I get to the end and I'm like, I hate all of this. I want to throw it away. There are some days when I sit down for 30 seconds and I crank out a song and I'm like, this is the best song I've ever written, because I was feeling creative. I was able to hold on to those thoughts. Everybody's individual. Everybody has their own problems, their own struggles that they have to face. And so like all you can really do is develop good habits in your life. You have to be able to isolate what the issue is. If you're the type of person who you move too fast, maybe you need to integrate something like a meditation into your life that can just help you ground yourself. Maybe life moves too slow, or maybe you need to find a way to put you outside of your comfort zone in a controlled environment where you can start learning how to branch out of the box that you're in, and you can really start to conquer the demons that are hiding below the surface of the water, so to speak.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. And I just want to say shout out to all of the people who have shared their struggles or neurodivergence with me, who inspired me to go down the rabbit hole of learning more about this stuff over the last probably 6 months or so, because it really has helped me understand people a lot better. I'm talking about like friends that I've had for a decade plus. I'm like, oh man, they make sense now. And several of them, I've just been like, hey, just wanted to check, is this you? And they're like, oh yeah, that I have that. I'm like, I get it now. If we weren't on the same page at any point, I apologize. So I'm not going to name names, of course, because that's not my information to share. But I just want to say thank you to those of you who have come forward with these things and inspired me to go down this journey of learning more about how the human mind works, which also I've discovered the human mind is really interesting. I mean, I took psychology in college, but I didn't care. I was in college. I was like, just give me the audio classes.
It was psychology in college.
Oh, Matt, you're stealing my job. I know this podcast is not a union shop, but come on, you know better.
I couldn't miss the opportunity.
It was just a little college-y in psychology.
Oh, there you go. Ooh, psychology.
Anyway, so to get into this episode, we've divided it into two major sections. We have your good habits and your bad habits that you cannot break if you're Tyler from Neon Trees. It's a good song. Anyway, we're going to cover the good habits first because we want to leave you on a negative note. I'm just kidding. We just put the good habits first because we like talking about happy stuff more than we like talking about sad stuff. And all the bad habits are going to have resolutions anyway. So we're not just going to be like, don't do this. We're going to say, don't do this. Instead, do this.
If you do this, then you suck. That's just what I say when I look in the mirror every day, you know?
That's got to be amazing for your mental health.
Yep, self-slander is a recipe for success.
Yeah. And I just want to say, like, we're keeping this episode light. We know it's a really serious topic, but we also know that when you're talking about something this serious, you got to keep it light because otherwise it just gets to be a drag. We don't want to take a topic like this and just make it boring where you're going to tune out and you're not going to listen because it's so important. We want you to listen to this. So for cracking jokes, we do understand how serious this is. But your first set of good habits is in the studio. And this is my favorite one because I love taking breaks. I'm the engineer. And I'm just like, okay, cool. Let's take 5. And I grab a bag of chips and I drink some water and all that. Realistically, I'm a workaholic and I'm like, no breaks. Keep going. But I understand how important breaks are. And especially if you're frustrated and you can't nail a take, you've done it 20 times and you just can't get it right, be like, hey, I need to take a break. Please, let me out of here. And if the engineer, producer says no, they're probably not a good fit for you.
I've literally been, in the vocal booth before, frustrated, can't nail a take. One of my big personal problems is taking criticism. I don't take criticism very well. And especially in my early career, it would be like, I'd work so hard on something and try so hard to get something. And then I'd go into the studio and start singing it. And as soon as I sing my take, one of my bandmates would be like, can you do it just like this? Like, oh, well, this part's flat. And it's like, yeah, I know. I don't need to hear where I screwed up the second after I screwed up. I'm aware that I screwed up. Trust me. I'm here doing it. And that was like this huge hurdle that I had to get over personally. Even on this last run in the studio, Jesse would stand there right next to whoever was producing and say, do this, try to sing it this way. And I'm there, I'm like trying to overcome muscle memory or like overcome the way I'd been practicing it for a year. And it's like, why are we changing melody lines now? It literally gave me anxiety. I've never enjoyed going to the studio, period. The only thing about the studio that I like is getting back the final product. And that's a little bit of like perfectionist in me. And it's a little bit of like when you're creating art, you never know when your art is done. And in this last time we were there, my guitarist turned to my producer and said, I literally just told Matt all these different melody lines to sing, and he just sang them. It's just like the difference now, 10 years later than it was 10 years ago, is light years. It doesn't mean it's not still hard and very difficult for me to be able to do that, because there's a lot of like humility that comes with that. And I've kind of had to let go a lot of my own presuppositions. But in turn, that has made my mental health when I go to the studio a lot better, because there's something way more fantastic about hearing my bandmates say, oh, why don't you try singing that while standing on your tippy toes? So then I sing it while standing on my tippy toes, and that just makes my take a little bit brighter. And then I see them dancing in the vocal booth, or dancing in the mixing room. And when I see that, that gives me this burst of energy, and that gives me this confidence, and then it's like, oh, hey, they were dancing that one take, and then I nailed the next 10 takes. Having this environment where you can be humble, where you can talk to the engineer and the producer, and you can figure out what type of feedback works best for you. One of my favorite things about working with one of our producers is that he knows how I work. He knows how I tick really well. I know my strengths and weaknesses, and so does he. He'll sit there and say, oh, like, why don't you whisper that take? And really, he understands the sonics of my voice. And that's another really important thing, is that because he knows my strengths and weaknesses, that allows him to come to me and say, hey, like, why don't you try doing that? And then I can layer it. And it gives him just like a better roadmap than the overall procedure of writing a song. It's like, I'm happier. My guitarist is happier because I'm trying new things. My producer's happier because I'm trying new things, and because he already sees the puzzle. That strengths and weaknesses can be like really, really powerful. And sometimes when you're in the vocal booth, you need to know what you need. For me, like I was saying earlier, a long time ago, I couldn't have my bandmates in the mixing room. I couldn't have them listening to my takes. It would drive me insane. There were times I'd literally kick Jesse out, and that's okay. He has a higher standard than I do, and I've learned that. And so, like, again, it's a period of like humility where you have to understand that your bandmates are creating art too, so they have a say. But if you need them to leave or stay, Burt McCracken literally couldn't do his screaming parts when he was in the studio. And so his bandmates threw pots and pans at him.
Wait, for real?
Literally threw pots and pans at him, hitting him with pots and pans, and that would hurt. But you know what? That got him to scream some of those shrill, horrendous screams, and it really got his adrenaline pumping, and it really caused them to put out some of the best records of the 90s, at least for the hardcore emo scene. He found his strengths, he found his weaknesses, or maybe one of his bandmates did. He had enough humility to not walk out of the studio when that was happening. Now, I'm not saying that that's the best for your mental health. I'm sure that when he released that product, he was proud of it. Burt McCracken is still touring, so there's something to be said about that. He's on tour with A Day to Remember. They're still doing just fine. And having that longevity, that's really what the race is. You can either stay in the music industry long enough to be considered a success, or you can buckle under the weight of your mental health. So find out your strengths and weaknesses. Ask your bandmates to leave or to come. I feel like I do worse when it's my bandmates in the mixing room, but I do better when there's random people in the mixing room, because I get nervous about sounding bad. I know those things about me. I'm a natural performer. My bandmates have heard me perform tens of thousands of times, so I don't have that like itch to perform super well for them psychologically. But when somebody comes in and visits the studio and it's like, oh gosh, if I sound like crap, they're just going to write us off forever. For me, all of these things kind of like mentally add up. And when I'm in the booth, it can be very, very daunting. So it's like, sometimes take a little break, make sure you got a full belly, make sure you're hydrated. People that take waters into the vocal booth, you're killing your natural lubricants in your voice by drinking water in between takes. It's like you want to be warm when you go in there, so you need to be hydrated, eat a good breakfast before you go spend a full day in the vocal booth. But these are all like really good habits to have. And they might sound kind of negative. These are the tools that kind of equip you to like move forward. The more you practice, the more you prepare, the more you can see yourself in your mind's eye trying things. And that this doesn't forego actual practice, but the more you can do these things, the more set for success you'll be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the only thing I have to add to that, which, you talked about taking criticism. So 2 things to add, really. The first thing is, taking criticism is a muscle. You have to build up that muscle to be able to do it. But the next thing is understanding, like you're saying, what kind of person you are in the studio. Don't be afraid to tell the engineer or the producer, hey, this is the feedback style that I respond to best. So maybe you need The good, the bad, the good. That's a technique a lot of people use for feedback. Hey, that take was great. Love the energy. This one line was just a little sharp or a little flat. But aside from that, sounded really great. Why don't we do that one line again? We'll punch it in. Sound good? Or some other people might just react better to, okay, that one was good. Let's do it again. It really depends. So learning what kind of feedback you want from the people you're working with and communicating that to them is a really important step, I think. And it seems like you've learned that, Matt. That's the whole summary of what you're saying. But just to put it into 2 sentences, that's it. Learn what you respond to and communicate that to the people you're working with.
That's the most powerful tool for being in the studio. The studio is a place of humility. You can either have humility when you're going in, or you will have humility when you're coming out and you're not satisfied with that product. We've talked a lot about building your circle and about, having these good quality relationships with your bandmates. The producer is the same. I've worked with producers who just say, okay, and go on to the next take, and you're just like, ugh. I remember one time recording an Illusion in Shambles with this guy, and I could feel the frustration off of the producer. So when I finally got into the vocal booth, I was just like nervous. I nailed every take, but it was not a good experience. And then ironically, we ended up re-recording the whole song and going with somebody else anyway. I mean, there was a bad experience with the whole thing. There was this mental stigma. So if you can build good habits, surround yourself with good people, know your strengths and weaknesses, and go in with an open mind, then the weight of the studio will not crush you.
Yeah, I think that's really important because the studio is where the process starts. You're not going to go on tour without something to promote. You can, but that's not a great idea. So if the process starts poorly in the studio, that's going to reflect on everything else down the road. And speaking of going on tour and being on the road, that's the next section we have. And to get things started, this is what always worked for me. And this is something I do at home too. I have a rhythm. So when I was on Warped Tour, most days we had to be ready by 8 a.m. So I'd wake up at 6:30. I would get dressed. Hopefully the bus was already at the venue. If it wasn't, we were screwed. I'd be off the bus by 7 if we were there, go to catering, get breakfast, enjoy a nice leisurely half-hour breakfast, cereal, fruit, whatever, come back to the bus, brush my teeth, get my stuff ready, and be outside by 7:55. So I was always out there at least 5 minutes early because I didn't want to be that guy. And there were people on the team who they would be late and they'd get called out for it because that slowed everything down. So have a healthy schedule. I do the same thing here. Like, I don't remember if it was exactly 6:30 when I was on tour, but still, I get up at 6:30, I get on the bike for half an hour, hop in the shower at 7, have breakfast, start work at 8. And that's my morning routine every single weekday. Maybe I'll try to sleep in until 7:30 or 8 on the weekends, but I have that routine. The next thing, I already mentioned breakfast, is eat healthy and just have that schedule, that routine with your meals. One, or actually a couple of the times I was on tour, it was just totally random when we would get to eat because sometimes we'd be leaving the hotel at 5 in the morning, sometimes we'd be leaving at 9. And it all depended because I was the driver for that tour. I would wake up as close to the time we needed to leave as possible so I could get the maximum amount of sleep to drive safely. So I would wake up and have some leftovers, brush my teeth, and hop in the van. I gave myself, 45 minutes to an hour. But the schedule changed every day. Then, when we went to get lunch, sometimes it would be 11, sometimes it would be 2 or 3. When we got to the venue, sometimes I would set up the merch table and then I'd have to find food. Other times, there would be food right next door, and I could just grab food and eat before I set up the merch. It all changed drastically from day to day. That was a really tough tour for me because I wasn't able to stay on that routine. I would get hangry. I wouldn't have eaten in like 6 or 7 hours and be like, man, I need food. I'm not going to eat for the 2 hours. This is tough. And so having that rhythm, if you are the de facto tour manager for your band, make sure you have that option available. Even if some days you leave at 5 a.m. and some days you leave at 9 or 10, doesn't matter. Try to plan it out so you can have a stop at 7 or have breakfast in the hotel lobby at 7. Whatever it is, provide that option to people if they need that rhythm, which, frankly, I think pretty much everyone does. Some people skip breakfast. I'm a breakfast person. I can't do that. Give people the opportunity to have that rhythm.
Absolutely. I think that's perfect. I mean, you have so many things that are out of your control. You don't control when load-in is. You don't control when you play. You don't control when you're going to leave. All of these things are kind of dictated for you. If you want a healthy mental state while you're on the road, schedule as many things as you can. Create as much routine as you possibly can with the pieces that you have. These things are going to change on a day-to-day basis. The one thing that really can't afford to change is things like rest. Like, you have to sleep every night. no matter what. Sometimes you're going to be leaving a little bit later than you're expecting. Sometimes you're leaving earlier. So ways that you can kind of control these things is like have good supplements with you. Like magnesium is something that like a lot of people are really deficient in, and it's a great mood relaxer and it helps you fall asleep. So like once you finish playing and you're loaded up, go drink some water with some magnesium in it. It'll help you start to relax. It'll help you fall asleep. Maybe you're a light sleeper. Maybe noise canceling headphones are a really, really phenomenal thing for you. Maybe vitamin D is a fantastic supplement for you as well. You're in dark venues all the time. You're in your vehicle all the time. You might not be getting very much sunlight and things like that. All of these things like affect your mood pretty drastically. Take some vitamin D and see how well you feel. It really is the difference between night and day sometimes, where it's like, wow, all of a sudden I feel like I have the energy to face the day. I feel like my body is revitalized. Like, oh, my skin is feeling better. There's all sorts of benefits. But the big thing is that it's something that you can control. Some things are about elimination. Some things are about additives. Sometimes you eliminate like, oh, you're sleeping on a bad mattress pad, or you're eliminating playing music while you drive. So that way your brain can like really turn off while you're resting. Some of the time it's like, no, I have to have noise canceling headphones because my drummer has sleep apnea. Guess what? That's a must. And if I hope to have any sleep, I either need to like knock myself out with Benadryl, which I don't recommend, but it does work, or you need to have like some other tool that kind of helps you circumnavigate that. Because I tell you what, if you go for 3 weeks with poor sleep and poor diet, you will get to the end of that tour and you will never want to go on the road again. Have good medicines, have good supplements, have good noise canceling headphones, and have a good schedule. If you have all these things, that's a cocktail for success on the road.
Absolutely agreed. And it's so important. And you might be thinking about, this is all like physical stuff. Well, yeah, but your mind is not going to be in good shape if you neglect your body. That's really what it comes down to. If you don't get sleep, your mind's not going to function. If you don't feed yourself properly, it's not going to function. I know bands love going to Taco Bell, and I'm not going to lie, like Taco Bell has some good vegan stuff. Like I'll get a crunch wrap once in a while, but I don't want to eat Taco Bell every day. And to be honest, it's not that cheap. I'll go there and a crunch wrap is like $8. I can go get a vegan burger from a vegan spot for 10 to 12. Saving $2 worth eating at Taco Bell, and plus the Taco Bell portions are pretty tiny.
Plus, then you got to spend an extra 20 minutes at the bathroom at your next gas station.
Yeah, and you don't know when that's going to be either. That could be a couple hours down the road.
Yeah, one guy in the band who decides that they need to go to the bathroom when everybody else is all done and they're all back on the bus.
And the number one rule on the bus is no number two.
That's right. The third aspect that we kind of want to touch on is practice. This is a less prominent one, but it is a really important one. It's easy to kind of forget that this is so integral, but when you're there to practice, you're there to practice. That's good. You should be making progress. But there's more than one thing that you can do to fortify your mental health. This is the time that you joke around and have fun with your bandmates. This is when it's time to get practice done. But don't forget that your friends first and that your business partners second. When you develop these awesome relationships, these fantastic memories, those are the things that you go back and remember. Like, I've played so many shows, I forget tons of performances that I've had. But I do remember like going to Niagara Falls with my bandmates. I do remember acting like kids in Texas, driving scooters through the rain, stuff like that is not music related. These are things that really fortify the relationships surrounding the band. And it's never a chore to spend time with people that you love doing fun things. When there's an opportunity for fun things, like, do it. If you have a chance to like go to a museum while you're in some different city as a band, go do it. It doesn't have to be a photo shoot. It doesn't have to be for TikTok videos. It doesn't have to be for likes. It can be for pure self-enjoyment. It can be for these things that really make you feel whole. And so go with your bandmates. Have fun. If tempers start to flare up, take 5 minutes. Recognize when others in the band might be taking their frustrations out on you. Realize when you might be taking your frustrations out on other people. It's okay to be like, hey guys, I'm going to sit out on this run of the song that we're practicing because maybe my throat hurts. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I need a break. Maybe we're practicing the day before we need to go into the studio and I don't want to kill myself, strain my voice or whatever. There's a plethora of variables that you could be analyzing. But the big thing is you're friends, you love each other. The practice space in general is a safe space. It's a safe haven for everybody to come together, to be themselves, to work, to progress. But part of the way that we progress is by being real, open, honest, truthful, transparent, vulnerable. And on top of that, these are like your best friends. It's not a chore being yourself around your friends. These are some of the few people in your life where you can be yourself 100% of the time, and they are still going to love you for it, assuming that, you haven't done nothing but make emotional withdrawals from the relationship. Hopefully you've made some emotional deposits too. But remember that, these people care about you and you care about them. And so first and foremost, it's a space of progression and just enjoyment.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that, when we say if tempers flare, take a break, that's directed at if somebody's getting upset at you. If you're the person getting upset at someone, you need to stop, take a breath, and apologize. You have to do those three things. If you keep yelling at them, whether they take a break and walk out or not, that is going to leave a cut on them. It's going to cut them emotionally, and you don't want that to happen. And I've seen this working in the studio with artists. I remember very clearly at one point, the guitarist and songwriter of a band yelling at the bass player saying, "Why can't you play this? It's not that difficult. I wrote it. I know." And I'm just like, dude, if it's that easy, why don't you do it? Why do you have a bass player? If you can do it, you do it. And guess what? He couldn't. Okay, maybe he wrote it, but he doesn't know how to play bass. And the thing is, he wrote it on a guitar. The frets are closer. That's really what it came down to. He was asking the bass player to go from like the 3rd fret to the 9th fret in a split second, which that's a big leap. And he was just hitting the 8th fret or the 10th fret because he was trying to do it so quickly. I mean, on a guitar, you can basically do it just by moving up a string. The bass has 4 strings instead of 6 strings. So he couldn't just move to the next string. He had to actually go down the fretboard. That made it more complicated as well. Plus, with a bass, you move up a string. Even if he had been able to do that, you get that thinner, tinny bass sound rather than the nice full bass sound if you go up the neck on the lower strings. So all that said, recognize if you're the problem. That's a big thing. If you're the problem, take a step back and apologize and find a way to make sure that doesn't happen again. You don't want to blow up at people like that. That is not okay. Anyway, this is going to be the last section of our good habits, and this is at home. Communicating effectively so your family, your friends, your loved ones are okay with you being gone for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, months at a time, because that puts a strain on any relationship, especially if it's people you live with. So you want to make sure that you communicate this in advance. First, just sit down for a chat on a regular basis. I would recommend either weekly or monthly to discuss plans and goals for the future, and not just your plans and goals, the plans and goals of whoever you're talking to. Because if it's totally one-sided, if you're saying, I want to do this, I want to do that, that's not a building block for a successful relationship. If you both talk about what you want and what you plan on doing and have a healthy way to compromise and find something that works for everyone, that's good. Now, if your partner says, I don't ever want you touring again, you have to make that decision. There's a great article a few years ago released by, I believe, the guitarist of The Maine, where he went into detail about basically like the love of his life asked him to stop touring. And he realized he had to make that decision. And he actually split up with his girlfriend or fiance. He's like, no, I love touring. I love our fans. This is what I have to do. And he was heartbroken by it, but he had to make that decision rather than trying to do both, because he knew that she would never be happy when he was gone half the year, and he would never be happy not playing shows ever again. And that's an incredibly tough decision, but they did the mature thing and talked about it. And I see so many people that don't talk about things like this. So be sure to have a chat and check in, because opinions change. Maybe something that worked 5 years ago or even 5 months ago doesn't work now. And by having that realistic opportunity to express yourselves in a safe space, no temper, no anger, nothing like that, it's incredibly important. So that's a really good habit to have. Communicate and have it on a schedule so you don't say, oh, well, we'll talk about it soon. We'll talk about it soon. No, you're going to talk about it every Wednesday at 2 p.m. or every second of the month or the second Saturday or whatever. You have a set schedule that you're going to stick to. And if you can't make it happen at that time because you have something going on, you're going to set another time to do it. And that's not going to be way out in the future. It's going to be the next day or something. You're not going to miss that, because that is so incredibly important in any relationship. And that's how you have the mental capacity to focus on music when you're doing music. Because if your life is a mess, you're not going to be able to focus on music either. That's the unfortunate truth.
That brings us into bad habits. There are a plethora of bad habits that you can get into when it comes to mental health. So we're going to start with the studio. Just like it is absolutely wonderful to go into the studio knowing your strengths and weaknesses, we realize that this isn't always the case for people. Sometimes you have to go through the ringer in order to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are. So you should not criticize your bandmates in a manner that is degrading. You should really try to constructively work together so that you can achieve the best outcome together. These are your friends. You probably already know how you interact with them. Maybe your friends are the types of people that you can throw insults at them and they think it's fun. Maybe they're the type of people who, if you insult them, they will shut down entirely. You should know these things about your bandmates, and you should take that into the studio with you and realize that, hey, if Joe is really good about positive words, then let's throw positive words at Joe. Maybe we do the compliment sandwich with Joe. One thing that you should also be wary of is being a pushover. So let's say you're not criticizing your bandmates, but your other bandmates are criticizing you, and they're not doing it in a way that is going to result in the best possible product coming out of the studio. You should not be afraid to put your foot down. If feedback crosses the line, then it crosses the line. You need to make a very distinct line. It's like, hey, you can do this, you can do that, but throwing pots and pans at me is too much. You need to know these strengths and weaknesses about yourself. If you have thin skin about something, don't be afraid to be vulnerable with your bandmates and say like, hey, I really don't like this kind of negativity. I really don't like when I can hear you sighing into the microphone when I don't nail a take. If you know that you're one of those people who doesn't respond well to sighing and your bandmate is in there sighing every 2 seconds, then maybe you should kick them out of the studio. That's okay. Having these open conversations with your bandmates is really going to allow you to excel in the studio and eliminate as many of the bad habits as you possibly can without becoming mentally bogged down and controlled by all of these externalities.
Yeah, ultimately it comes down to, like you were saying, Matt, don't let yourself be walked over, and don't be that person who walks all over other people. Going back to that example I gave in the practice section of good habits, we were kind of already touching on bad habits, where I explained about the guy who said, it's so easy, you can't play it. Like, that's a bad habit. Coming at someone like that, don't do that. That's the worst thing you could do. Maybe say, hey, what part of this is difficult to play? Maybe we can figure out a different way to play it. Just reframe it. Because those two guys were basically at each other's throats that day. The rest of the day after that, tensions were high, they didn't come back down, and that affected the whole project. But anyway, the next one, Matt, on the road, and you added a really good one here if you want to take it away.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the big thing is we all love to party, whether it's a social party, whether you're straight edge or not, we all love the social interaction. But this is not why you are on tour. If it is why you're on tour, then you should reevaluate, because it's not why your bandmates are on tour. And so you're going to get to the end of this tour and you guys are going to be at each other's throats. And what's worse is you might be bottling up those emotions, or you might have somebody who's a really big personality that doesn't realize that these things are getting to their bandmates. And then you start to create schisms. And ultimately, this will lead to band members leaving your tour. I have seen plenty of tours where one of the band members leaves, where a hired gun needs to be brought on in order to help out, where somebody says, I need to take this break for mental health. All of those things are basically just, they build up and they build up and they build up until they finally, the dam breaks and everything is washed away, including all of your progress. Like you were saying, James, with the developing good relationships and outlining goals with significant others, the same goes for your bandmates. These are significant others. These are relationships. If you talk to them and you set clear goals and you set clear expectations and you say, oh, on Monday, we're going to make this happen. And on this week, we're going to make this happen. And maybe there is a good time that says like, oh, hey guys, on Friday, we're going to be on this city in this place and we really want to party. Okay, well, the partiers then have their what's important to them laid out, and the other people who don't party have what's important to them laid out, and everything works much better. And both people can end up going and doing exactly what they want. That story I told a little bit ago about riding scooters through the rain in Dallas, I did that with my drummer while my other bandmates went and did their own thing. That's okay. But it was fun. They did their own thing. We did our own thing. And we came back together at the end and all of us felt recharged. We set clear goals, so to speak, for what we were doing for the day. And then we chased it. And in the end, it left us all feeling much more revitalized and able to continue the tour just fine. The exhaustion that comes from bottling up emotions and from not being on the same page, it leaves you feeling drained mentally, physically. It's enough to break up a band. It's enough to sever relationships for long periods of time, if not indefinitely. So make sure that you're all on the same page. Make sure you have clearly laid out goals and then chase them together.
Like you're saying, bottling things up does not work out. I've never seen that work out for anyone, especially if it's to the point where you're telling other people about, oh, so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that, and then it gets back to that person. That is the worst thing. That fuels the fire so badly and will literally make the band implode. That's not what you ever want to have happen.
Another important thing to do on the road is if you're tired and you're driving, then ask someone else to drive. And if nobody in the band can keep their eyes open, then don't drive. This is just a pretty basic safety one, but it is a bad habit on the road. And nothing hurts mental health quite like a car accident or rolling your van. So just stay away from that. You know, wisdom says rest. Sleep is one of the most important things about our humanity. If you need rest, then take the rest. It's okay to show up a little bit late to a load in if you have to, if that means you actually show up. So that's a very important thing. Don't drive tired. That's terrible.
Yeah, 100%. And to add to that, you don't have to be physically tired. You can also be mentally tired. If your mind is just totally burned out because you're stressed about something, you're worried about something, and you can't focus, you might not be falling asleep, but your brain is not functioning at full capacity. That's another time to just say, hey, I can't focus on this. Can somebody else please drive? You want to be at 100% if you're driving around in a vehicle that weighs probably 10,000 pounds with a bunch of other people in it, because you have a lot of lives at stake, both in that van and in other vehicles on the road that are much smaller than what you're driving. Be safe when you drive. Matt, I think you and I, we all know people who have been in van crashes. I know the front of house engineer for Silent Planet. They rolled their van on ice in Wyoming like 2 weeks ago. Thankfully, they're all okay.
The day after they played Denver, I saw them that night.
They were going from Denver to Salt Lake. I saw the first reports and like, oh man, that sucks. And then my friend posted it and I was like, oh, that's who he's on tour with right now? That sucks. And it was the same area where Bayside rolled their van back in
forever ago. Yep.
And lost their drummer. I mean, driving on ice just in general is sketchy, especially since most vans don't have winter tires. Like you get a rental van, it's not going to have winter tires on it. So that's dangerous. But then you're pulling a trailer too. That is not good.
Well, this brings us to practice, which is very similar to being in the studio. Bad habits are don't throw unnecessary criticism around. Don't be harsh. Working together provides the best outcome. Good practices are showing up to practice on time, respecting other people's time. Bad practices are showing up like a grumpy attitude and being angry about what other people are doing, or you know, it's just, again, it's all about open communication, working together. I think we all know what a good practice looks and feels like, and I think we all know what good habits in our own practice spaces look like. So that's a pretty basic one.
Matt, I know you got to run because we're running short on time here, but thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you back. I'm going to finish up this last section by myself, and then I'm looking forward to doing the next part about physical health with you, hopefully next Wednesday, and we'll keep going.
Awesome. That'll be the plan. Thanks for having me back, James.
My pleasure. All right. So the last thing is at home, because when you're home, you're separate from your band, and you want to make sure that your communication with your bandmates is staying as effective as it should be, even when you're with them. And the same goes for people at home that you live with, whether they're family by blood, brothers, siblings, parents, or people you're in a relationship with. You want to make sure that you're not giving anyone the silent treatment, because that is just incredibly toxic and not productive. It's very easy to ghost people when you're communicating online. And especially if you just had a long tour and you got back and you're frustrated at your band, it might be tempting to ignore them. Don't do it. Same thing is, if your family is frustrated that you're leaving, don't give them the silent treatment. Touring is a huge step, and even if you've done it before, you have to get your life in order before you leave. I know back when I was touring, it was always difficult to be away from my family and loved ones because you're not going to see them for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, however long it is. And it's not a vacation. It is work. A lot of people kind of think tour is vacation. It's not. And if people in your family or your circle don't understand that, you might get back and you're exhausted and they're frustrated immediately that you're not doing XYZ. And it's like, I got back last night. This is the first time I've slept well in 2 months. Please let me have some rest. And they're like, no, you just had this great time. You're on tour. It's like, no, that's not what tour is. So communicating openly and effectively, like we discussed earlier, is what you absolutely have to do. Now, to wrap this all up, mental health is incredibly important, and our physical health ties into that because you can't have a happy mind if you don't have a happy body. Now, the inverse is not necessarily true. There are people out there who have a healthy body, but their mind is not in the state that it should be in ideally. So I'm not going to say like, hey, if you're physically healthy, your mind is going to be great too, because that's just not true. But if your body is physically healthy, you have a much better chance of your mind being healthy as well. So stay tuned for that episode. It should be the next one, or at the worst case scenario, it's going to be number 161, which is the second episode from now. Either way, thank you for listening to this. I really hope that all of the things we've talked about will give you some ways to better frame how you interact with your bandmates, your family, your loved ones, whoever it is, so you can have the most effective music career, all while staying as healthy as possible. Again, if you need help, we are not professionals. Please seek out a professional. If you go to Music Cares or Backline, they can help you. But aside from that, look up people in your area who can help. Because ultimately, all we can do is share our experience. We're not licensed therapists or anything like that. We just know what has worked for us in our travels, in our time working in the music industry. So please, if you need more help, go seek that out. And don't be worried about what people are going to say. Because you know what? Everybody has a blip at some point. That's just how life is. So go do what you got to do to stay healthy. That does it for this episode of the Bandhive Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. I really appreciate it. And I'm super stoked to have Matt back. It's so nice to have a co-host who I can bounce ideas off of and who can bring amazing ideas to the podcast as well. So thank you, Matt, for coming back. And for anyone who's listening, if you're not already subscribed, please do that, because Matt, he's a great co-host. He's entertaining, all that kind of stuff, and you don't want to miss the upcoming episodes. So whether you're in Spotify, Apple, whatever app you use, please hit that subscribe button and make sure to listen every week, because we're going to have lots of amazing tips coming your way. We'll be back with another brand new episode next Tuesday at 6 a.m. Eastern. Until then, I hope you have a great week. Stay safe, and of course, as always, keep rocking.